My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until that day, I believed my life had followed a predictable path. I was 32, a rising event planner based in Denver, Colorado, with a steady boyfriend, a supportive family, and a once-in-a-lifetime assignment that I couldn't refuse: organizing a high-profile charity gala in a remote mountain lodge in Wyoming. I remember stepping off the rental car and feeling the crisp mountain air bite at my cheeks. The gala's hosts had arranged a small charter flight from the nearest regional airport, an hour's drive from Denver, to the rustic airstrip carved into the side of a jagged bluff. It seemed romantic, even cinematic, as I climbed the narrow steps of the twin-engine turboprop with 8 other passengers. We were strangers, 5 guests, 2 crew members, and me. The pilot, Captain Reynolds, a grizzled veteran with silver hair and a calm smile, introduced himself casually, as if we were boarding a city bus. He motioned us to secure our seatbelts. The interior smelled of leather and engine oil, and outside, the blades spun faster, a low hum vibrating through the floor. I tucked my chestnut hair behind my ear and offered polite nods to my seatmates, none of whom spoke much beyond nervous glances. Moments later, the engines roared to life. The propellers carved the thin air with increasing urgency, and the plane rattled over the uneven tarmac before the nose lifted. I leaned back against the headrest and watched the vast expanses of pine-clad mountains recede beneath us. Sunlight streamed in through the side window, illuminating dust motes that danced like fireflies. My heart fluttered with excitement and a whisper of fear. I had never been much of a flyer, but the view was undeniable. A cathedral of rocky peaks punctured the horizon, and my phone's camera struggled to capture the grandeur below. 15 minutes into the flight, turbulence shook the cabin. A collective gasp rose from the passengers as the plane shuddered. I gripped the armrests, knuckles whitening, but Captain Reynolds' voice came through the intercom. "Just some mountain wind, folks. Nothing to worry about. Should smooth out in a minute." His confidence was contagious. I closed my eyes, picturing the elegant tables I'd painstakingly planned for the gala, the crystal chandeliers, the famed pianist I'd booked. That brief moment of serenity shattered without warning. A deafening bang, like a thunderclap trapped inside the fuselage, tore through the cabin. The lights flickered and died. Oxygen masks dropped, dangling uselessly above our heads. Coffee mugs and water bottles flew from the small service table in the galley. Captain Reynolds' steady voice cut out mid-sentence. Panic erupted. I heard screams, then a grotesque tearing sound as metal groaned. The world tilted violently to the right. The last thing I remember was the acrid scent of smoke, the flash of a white-hot blaze outside the window, and my own scream swallowed by chaos. I woke up to silence so profound it felt unreal. Blinking against the blinding sun, I tried to sit up, but my body refused. My vision swam. Panic surged again when I realized my left arm wasn't there. Instead, a gauze-wrapped stump pulsed with pain where my elbow used to be. I tried to push myself up with my good arm, but I was lying on coarse grass, the charred remnants of a twisted metal fuselage just yards away. The air was acrid, filled with smoke, and the distant hiss of leaking fuel. For a heartbeat, I thought I was dreaming. Then came the quiet sobs, faint, pained, but achingly alive, of someone else nearby. I turned my head and saw him. A young man, barely older than me, dazed and slumped against a tree, his jeans shredded, one boot missing. His left shoulder was bleeding heavily. Our eyes met, and no words were exchanged. None were needed. We were the luckiest and unluckiest people on Earth, castaways of an explosion we never saw coming. I tried to call out, but my throat felt raw, like I had swallowed glass. The world around me blurred. The lonely mountains, the twisted wreck, the isolation. I realized there was no road, no highway, no rescue team arriving in minutes. We were alone in a wilderness that didn't forgive mistakes. Then came another noise, low and distant at first, like thunder rolling in the valley below, but it grew louder, deliberate, footsteps crunching on dead pine needles. I crawled, the pain in my shoulder and the stump at my side radiating like wildfire, trying to shield myself behind the fuselage's scorched shell. The young man groaned and reached for my hand. I squeezed it, uncertain whether he was a friend or another stranger, driven to desperation by hunger or fear. A figure appeared at the edge of the wreckage, an unlikely savior in dusty boots and a blood-smeared shirt. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide with horror at the sight of our injuries. Behind him, two others stumbled into view, one holding a twisted piece of metal, the other wielding what looked like a hunting rifle. "Is there anyone else alive?" the man shouted, his voice cracking. I managed a shaky nod. He rushed over, lifted me with surprising strength, and carried me away from the wreck before the plane's fuel tanks erupted in flames. As the heat licked at my back, I closed my eyes again, this time to focus on the sound of my own heartbeat. It was unlikely that we'd be found quickly, but we'd been seen. Rescue might still be possible. Amid the agony, a spark of hope ignited, and so I lay there on a makeshift stretcher of broken branches and shredded canvas, with an arm that wasn't mine anymore, surrounded by strangers who had become saviors, wondering how much time I had left and whether I would ever see home again. The pungent smell of campfire smoke drifted through my half-conscious mind, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. My eyelids fluttered open to reveal an eerie twilight sky streaked with bruised purple and amber. Somewhere nearby, the crackle of flames fought against a chilling wind that whispered through the pines. I fought to remember where I was. Then the memory of the explosion returned in awful clarity. The roar, the heat, the rupturing metal, and the sudden silence. I tried to sit up, but agony shot through my torso, pinning me to the ground like iron shackles. I glanced down at my left side. There, pressed against the forest floor, was a makeshift bandage too small for the wound it concealed. My side throbbed where jagged shards of fuselage had torn through flesh and muscle, but beneath that pain was an even darker ache, the absence of my arm. My gaze drifted to the stump wrapped in gauze, my fingers twitching involuntarily, as if seeking the hand that once belonged to them. Beside me, the young man who had awoken with me stirred. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and dried blood, but his dark eyes held a spark of determination. Through cracked lips, he whispered, "Sarah." My name sounded foreign on his tongue, but I nodded feebly. He managed a pained smile, then glanced around at the small circle of survivors gathered near the flickering fire. There were 6 of us now, 3 strangers who had stumbled upon the crash site, a pair of backcountry hunters named Marcus and Elijah, and a wildlife biologist called Dr. Rachel Lynn, along with me and the young man whose name I learned was Jason. The 6th was Captain Reynolds. His uniform was gone, replaced by a charcoal-stained t-shirt, but despite his injuries, a deep gash across his cheek and a twisted ankle, he stood sentinel at the edge of the clearing, scanning the dark tree line as if expecting another attack. "Can you sit up?" Rachel asked, her calm voice a lifeline in the chaos. She knelt beside me, inspecting the crude bandages, her hands gentle but sure. "We've cleaned what we could, but you need better medical care soon. We can signal from there." Rachel met my gaze. "We'll take turns carrying her," she said firmly, "and keep her warm. Hypothermia is a real risk tonight." She handed me a wool blanket, its coarse fibers prickling against my skin but offering a shred of comfort. I pulled it around my shoulders, feeling its warmth seep into my bones. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the mountains in inky silhouettes, we set off. Our path zigzagged through ancient pines, their low branches snagging packs and clothing. The air was thin here, and with each breath, my ribs felt like they were splitting. I moved slowly, each step a battle. Jason stumbled beside me, moaning softly as he tried to keep pace. Every so often, we'd stop, leaning on walking sticks for support, and take turns swapping who carried me on a crude litter made from branches and canvas scraps. Memories flickered behind my closed eyes. The voice of my mother reading bedtime stories, the bright lights of Denver at night, the proud tears in my father's eyes at my college graduation. They felt like echoes from another life, a life that seemed impossibly distant as I hobbled into the gathering darkness. About halfway to the fire tower, we heard it, the distant thunk of rotor blades cutting through the night air. The sound was faint, strained, a lifeline hanging by a thread. We dropped to our knees and waved torches fashioned from sticks wrapped in cloth and soaked in fuel. A beam of light swept through the forest canopy, followed by another. "They've seen us!" Jason rasped, voice raw with hope. Captain Reynolds let out a whoop of triumph. "Hold your signal steady!" The machine descended, skimming the treetops before settling in a small clearing nearby. Two medics jumped out, their faces masked, and raced toward us. Relief washed over me in hot waves, but it was tinged with a new fear. The realization that beyond this moment lay surgery, rehabilitation, and the stark truth of my new reality. I looked at my fellow survivors, Rachel adjusting Jason's bandages, Marcus and Elijah helping the medics lift me onto a stretcher. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and no words were needed. We had endured the unthinkable together, and now, for the first time since the explosion, I dared to believe we might live. As the helicopter ascended, carrying us toward a distant hospital and a future forever altered, I clutched the blanket to my chest and watched the charred mountain fade beneath the clouds. Somewhere in that smoky darkness, they had found us. And tonight, by sheer will and luck, we had survived. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I lay on the gurney, the antiseptic smell of the emergency room clawing at my senses. My world had narrowed to the pristine white ceiling tiles, each one a puzzle piece I mentally rearranged to distract myself from the throbbing pain that radiated from my chest and residual stump. A nurse adjusted the morphine drip, and I felt a warmth flood my veins, soothing the raw edges of agony enough to let me observe my surroundings without flinching. Towering behind the nurse's station was an array of monitors blinking cryptic symbols and heartbeats, beeps that felt like a metronome ticking off the fragile moments I had left. Through the curtained bay, I glimpsed pale blue scrubs hurrying past, surgeons, trauma specialists, technicians, all moving with the precision of a well-rehearsed ballet. Each step brought a hiss of pneumatic doors or the whir of medical equipment. Rachel had insisted on staying until I was safely admitted. Captain Reynolds, Elijah, and Marcus had returned to the crash site to assist law enforcement with the recovery of remains and wreckage. Jason, battered but alive, had been transferred to the adjacent bed. His dark head of hair was shaved now, revealing the contour of a skull still healing from a depressed fracture. On his bedside table sat a small photograph of his younger sister, her smiling face, a reminder of the future he still had to fight for. I closed my eyes and let the memories of the past 24 hours drift over me. The flash of orange flame, the crunch of wood and metal, the ragged breaths of survivors under a starless sky. And then the helicopter's blades, the whoomp whoomp that had meant salvation. But here, in this hospital wing, often called the Steel Towers by those whose lives depended on them, salvation was only the beginning of a long, uncertain journey. Minutes later, a doctor with kind grey eyes approached, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as Dr. Patel, the lead trauma surgeon, and explained that I had suffered a comminuted fracture of the humerus, multiple rib fractures on the left side, a collapsed lung that had been reinflated with a chest tube, and second-degree burns on my back where shrapnel had torn through my jacket. The stump of my left arm had been treated with an above-elbow amputation to remove irreparably damaged tissue. "There were no signs of infection on your tissues, thankfully," he said, tapping the chart. "But you'll need another surgery tomorrow to revise the amputation site, seal off any necrotic areas, and begin preparing a prosthetic fitting in the coming weeks. Respiratory therapy will start as soon as we can safely remove the chest tube." I wasn't just Sarah Mitchell anymore. I was a statistic, a wounded survivor, an arm's length removed from the person I had been. That night, shadows crept along the pale walls of my private room. The hum of the ventilator in the adjacent bay was a constant reminder of how thin the line was between life and death. My insomnia was punctuated by nightmares. I would awaken to the sound of the propeller's roar as the plane spiraled earthward, or feel Captain Reynolds' hand on my shoulder, whispering that he was sorry. Each dream left me gasping, my heart pounding in my ears, tears wetting the hospital pillow. When dawn's grey light seeped through the blinds, a physical therapist named Marisol arrived with a wheelchair and a bright smile. She spoke softly, introducing herself, then gently helped me sit up. My rib fractures protested in sharp stabs of pain, but releasing the built-up fluid in my lungs through cautious breaths was crucial. Marisol guided me through simple exercises, lifting my right arm overhead, tightening my abdominal muscles, slowly dangling my left stump at my side to promote circulation. "Small steps," she said. "You're doing great." He'd survived a traumatic brain injury and was on a similar road of recovery. His prognosis was good. He would walk again, but the emotional scars would take longer. We talked about our families, the mundanity of life before the crash, and how it felt to wake up in a stranger's body, a stranger's arm. In the afternoon, my parents arrived, my mother's eyes red and swollen, my father clutching a worn leather Bible. My mother pressed a damp cloth to my forehead, murmuring prayers between sobs. My father's voice trembled as he tried to offer comfort. "You're here, sweetheart, you're safe." Patel stopped by to check on me before the next surgery. His face was grave but compassionate. "The guilt you're feeling is normal," he said quietly. "Survivors carry it. But remember, you did nothing wrong. You were the victim of a random tragedy." As I closed my eyes, I resolved to honor the memory of the passengers and crew who hadn't survived by living, by pushing through each therapy session, and by reclaiming my identity, piece by piece. But in the stillness of the hospital room, I couldn't shake the question, how do you rebuild your life when the very bones of your body have been shattered? The hospital hallway buzzed with activity, a torrent of wheelchairs, IV poles, and rushing staff. I gripped the handrail as I was guided toward the physical medicine and rehabilitation unit. My blanket had been replaced by a hospital gown, and my hair, once styled with precision, hung limp around my shoulders. Each step was a negotiation between grit and pain, as fractured ribs and surgical wounds protested the motion. Inside the rehabilitation suite, I was introduced to Dr. Elaine Roberts, a prosthetist renowned for her work with trauma survivors. She led me to a workshop lined with prosthetic arms in various stages of assembly, sleek carbon fiber shells, intricate mechanical joints, and experimental myoelectric models wired to electronic sensors. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. An arsenal of artificial limbs promising renewed function, yet underscoring the permanence of my loss. Dr. Roberts invited me to sit at a workbench cluttered with sockets, liners, and cables. "Your body will tell us what it needs," she said kindly. "We'll start with a simple cosmetic arm to help with balance and body image, then progress to a functional prosthesis." She showed me the silicone liner that would slip over my residual limb, creating a snug interface with the prosthetic socket. "It might feel strange, hot, tight, but over time, you'll adapt." "I'm not sure I'm ready," I admitted, my voice hoarse. The memory of waking on that forest floor, bloodied, terrified, alone, rose like bile in my throat. What if it never feels like me? The first step is letting go of what was, so you can embrace what can be. Once I flung a coffee mug across the room in exasperation, tears blurring my vision as it shattered against the linoleum. A therapist gently swept up the shards. "It's okay to be angry," she said softly. "Grief is part of this process." I watched a televised briefing where the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, revealed that a catastrophic engine failure had precipitated an onboard fire and the subsequent explosion. Questions abounded. Maintenance records, pilot training, weather conditions. I felt exposed, my suffering a public spectacle. One afternoon, Captain Reynolds appeared in my room, leaning on his cane but smiling broadly. He'd been transferred to the same ward after sustaining a minor infection at the crash site. "They're making progress," he reported. "The NTSB thinks it'll be months before the final report, but they confirmed, None of this was our fault. But you don't owe them anything beyond your story on your terms. It wasn't perfect, but it was a miracle of engineering and resilience. I thought of Jason, Marcus, Elijah, and Rachel, strangers turned lifelines in the wilderness. I thought of the family members who had wept for me, believing I might be gone forever. And I thought of the gala I had been hired to organize, tables dressed in crystal and white linens, laughter echoing off timber walls. That world seemed impossibly far away, yet it was the world I had fought to return to. With trembling resolve, I whispered to the quiet room, "I will live again, I will laugh again, I will create beauty again." The sun had barely crested the Rockies when I arrived at Centennial Airport's hangar, the crisp morning light painting the silver fuselage of the same twin-engine turboprop that had betrayed us 100 days ago. My heart hammered as I stepped from the van, the familiar roar of jet turbines replaced now by the soft hum of electric ground vehicles. I paused, arm extended in front of me, feeling the weight of my myoelectric prosthesis, the sleek carbon shell heretofore confined to the hospital's rehab bay, its sensors quietly humming as they awaited my command. I was not alone. Captain Reynolds stood beneath the hangar's open door, leaning on his cane, his uniform crisp and uncreased. Beside him, Jason, fit and hale, his dark hair grown long enough to frame his face, gripped the clipboard in his uninjured hand, checking off items on a pre-flight checklist. Dr. Rachel, Lynn, and Marcus flanked them, their hiker's boots scuffed from months tracking wildlife and evidence in remote canyons. Even Elijah, the most reticent of our group, had arrived, his broad frame folded into a folding chair as he sipped coffee from a foam cup. Their presence steadied me. What had begun as a desperate scramble for survival in the wilderness had over these months blossomed into an unspoken camaraderie. We had shared life-saving first aid improvised from clothing and sticks, the cold terror of night under a canopy of indifferent stars, and the triumph of those first shaky steps with our prostheses. We had borne witness to each other's deepest fears, nightmares of smoke and flame, dreams of arms that would never return, and helped stitch together splintered souls with patience, tears, and laughter. I lifted my liner-covered stump and flexed the muscles in my upper arm. A gentle green LED pulsed at the base of the socket, indicating that the myoelectric sensors were active. "Ready?" Captain Reynolds asked, voice low but warm. I nodded. "As I'll ever be." Lynn secured my prosthetic arm into the modified cockpit grip adapter, a custom fitting that allowed me to throttle, steer, and engage the flaps with calibrated pressure. "Sensors are calibrated for 3 different grip patterns," she explained. "Light touch for switches, firm grip for throttle, and you'll activate the yoke controls with a gentle pull." I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, remembering the searing heat of the explosion and the moment I awoke alone in the forest. Then I opened them and reached out to the yoke. The controls pulsed under my command, alive and eager. Marcus gripped the intercom button. "Tower, this is N123SM requesting taxi clearance to runway 17, solo pilot 100 hours. His baritone voice crackled through the speakers. A calm reply came through. "N123SM, taxi approved. Have a safe flight." I guided us down the runway, fingertips brushing the yoke, prosthetic and flesh working in concert. When the runway lights slipped away beneath us and the mountains fell into their rightful place below, tears blurred my vision. I was flying again. Above the alpine meadows, the crisp air streamed in through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I trailed my prosthetic hand over the yoke's curve, feeling the subtle vibrations of lift and drag. Each adjustment, each bank, came naturally, an echo of the muscle memory from my pre-crash life, now translated through wires and algorithms. My right hand steered, my left provided balance and precision, and for the first time since that day, my spirit soared unchained. Below, my friends watched from the ground. Captain Reynolds saluted with a broad grin. Jason waved both arms, his laughter carried upward by the wind. Dr. Lynn and Marcus stood side by side, eyes bright with pride and something like awe. Elijah simply nodded, coffee forgotten, as if acknowledging my triumph with solemn respect. After 20 minutes of gentle circuits around the front range, I guided the aircraft back toward Centennial. My landing was textbook, smooth, controlled, and soft, earning nods from the flight instructors awaiting me on the ramp. I cut the engines and sat in silence for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. Finally, I unbuckled, but did not remove my headset. The prosthesis hummed faintly as I flexed it, and I realized that I had bridged two worlds, the one before the crash and the one after. The loss of my arm would forever remind me of the fire that tried to consume me. Yet here I stood, whole in spirit and capable in body, ready to plan my next gala and to live a life defined not by tragedy, but by the resilience born in its ashes. I stepped off the plane to a chorus of cheers. My heart swelled. Turning to Captain Reynolds and the others, I said softly, "Thank you for giving me back my sky." Yet every night, I found myself revisiting the crash site in my mind's eye. Twisted wreckage half buried in pine needles, the jagged hole in the fuselage like an open wound against the forest floor, and the acrid haze slowly dissipating beneath starless skies. I awoke with a start, chest tight, as if my ribs still bore the weight of that explosion. Morning light filtered through the blinds of my apartment for the first time in months. I'd moved out of the hospital's sterile walls into a modest downtown loft, where the hum of city traffic served as both comfort and reminder of life's pulse. The prosthetic socket was tucked beneath a tailored blazer as I sat at the dining table, sorting through a stack of invoices and venue contracts for my event planning business. My left arm, no longer flesh but carbon and circuits, rested in a supportive sling. It felt heavy and foreign at times, but each flicker of the myoelectric sensors under my skin reminded me that I had a tool, not just a trophy of past trauma. My morning routine had expanded to include physical therapy exercises in the living room, seated rows with resistance bands to strengthen my back muscles, elbow extensions with light weights to hone control over the prosthesis, and targeted core workouts to stabilize my balance. Around me, walls were adorned with framed photographs, one of the 9 of us survivors at a rookie flight school graduation ceremony, another snapped mid-cheer after my triumphant solo landing, and a smaller, more solemn portrait of the charred plane as investigators documented its final position. Each image told a story of pain, perseverance, and rebirth. I was in the middle of a narrow squat, holding the band taut at shoulder height, when the phone buzzed. It was Jason. His voice, warm and steady, crackled through as he reported that the NTSB's preliminary findings had been released. A faulty seal in the left engine's fuel pump had allowed vapor accumulation, leading to an in-flight fire that overwhelmed the crew's ability to isolate the hazard. No pilot error, no negligence on our part, just a cascade of mechanical failure and fate's cruel design. "I'm hosting a group hike next weekend," he said, "to the spot where we signaled the helicopter. I think it's time we face it together." Jason met me at the trailhead, carrying his own day pack and the wide-brimmed hat I'd lent him after his head injury. Captain Reynolds, Rachel, Marcus, Elijah, and a handful of other crash survivors turned friends gathered behind us. We stood together in a hush, the pine-scented air bright with anticipation and an undercurrent of reverence. We set off, the path winding uphill through dense stands of lodgepole pine and aspen. My prosthetic responded well, though I felt the impact of each footfall in my hips. Every so often, I paused to recalibrate, adjusting the socket's liner or loosening its grip. The group moved in silence, each of us lost in our own reflections. At the halfway point, we reached a rocky overlook where the jagged silhouette of the mesa beyond stretched toward the sky, the spot where we'd first seen the rotor blades. We paused again, forming a loose semicircle. Jason produced a weathered stainless steel flask, passing it to each person. We toasted, water for some, whiskey for others, to survival, remembrance, and to those who hadn't made it. Tears glistened on our cheeks as we spoke names. The co-pilot who had shielded a passenger from debris, the young father who had cradled his infant daughter until the end, the tour guide who had guided us into the open clearing that ensured we could be found. We let our grief pour out with the water and whiskey, watching it sink into the earth like rain. Refreshed and solemn, we continued the ascent. As the landscape grew more rugged, tree trunks blackened by past wildfires appeared at random. Silent reminders that the forest itself bore scars and regrew stronger. I recalled Dr. Roberts' words, "Your body, like the forest, will heal in layers. What's burned away can give rise to new growth." Today, we stand as survivors, as witnesses, and as testaments to human will. Let this place remind us not of what we lost, but of what we carry forward. Relief flooded me, proof that I was more than the sum of my injuries. We stood in silence until the wind stirred, carrying a chorus of rustling leaves. In that moment, the echoes of flame seemed to fade, replaced by a hush that felt like forgiveness. I raised my face to the sky, breathing deep of the pine-scented air, feeling the muscles of my phantom limb pulse with possibility. The descent back to the trailhead felt lighter, as if the ground itself buoyed our steps. At the van, we exchanged hugs and promising murmurs to meet again, at weddings, birthdays, or just to celebrate life's ordinary miracles. That night, as I lay in bed, the forest's memory no longer tormented me. Instead, it whispered of resilience, renewal, and community. My dreams were of laughter, unbroken arms, and a sky that once again felt like home. The first public hearing was the hardest. I sat in a sterile conference room at the NTSB headquarters in Washington, D.C., fluorescent lights glinting off slick mahogany conference tables. My prosthetic arm lay across my lap like a silent sentinel, its smooth carbon fiber shell a stark contrast to the polished wood beneath it. Around me, journalists and legal teams whispered into recorders, cameras clicked, and the hush was broken only by the soft shuffle of papers. Captain Reynolds sat to my left, his uniform crisp in its new airline-issued blazer, a symbol of a career reborn, even as he fought to reconcile guilt over lives lost under his command. To my right sat Jason, his dark eyes steeled with determination that belied the tremor in his left hand. Rachel Lynn, Marcus, and Elijah formed a second row behind us, a silent cohort to bear witness to our shared ordeal. We were no longer just survivors, we had become advocates, determined to ensure our tragedy would not be in vain. The panel convened, a trio of NTSB investigators in Navy suits, their expressions grave. The chairman, a tall woman with silver hair and lined eyes, tapped a gavel. "We are here today to receive testimony regarding the crash of Charter Flight 912, which occurred on March 12th, she began. "We welcome all survivors to share their experiences, observations, and any recommendations for preventing similar tragedies. Emergency preparedness, improved training for small charter operators on rapid-fire suppression systems, survivor support, establishing protocols for immediate psychological and physical care in remote crash locations." When the chairman called my name, I rose, unsteady but resolute. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I began, voice echoing in the hushed room. "On March 12th, I witnessed a catastrophic failure in the left engine's fuel system, a component failure that led to an in-flight fire and subsequent explosion. I watched the cabin suddenly fill with smoke, heard metal cry apart, and then..." I paused, throat constricting. I woke up alone in a forest with a limb I could no longer feel as my own. I spoke of resilience, of rehabilitation, of relearning to fly, and of the moment I landed solo, prosthetic arm at my side, ready to embrace the sky once more. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the investigators pressed me on technical details, inspection logs, hours flown since the last overhaul, the weather conditions at flight time. I answered as best I could, drawing upon the NTSB's preliminary report and the maintenance records Captain Reynolds had provided. Every factual statement was meticulously noted, cross-referenced with data retrieved from the flight data recorder and engine monitoring logs. Next, Jason took the stand. His testimony focused on human factors, how passengers and crew responded to the emergency, the need for clearer onboard instructions for smoke-filled cabins, and the value of including a quick-deploy locator beacon that could penetrate dense canopy cover. "If our signals had been delayed another 30 minutes, he said, voice steady but eyes damp, some of us might not have made it." Marcus and Elijah, the hunters, emphasized the value of local knowledge and robust communication between charter services and regional search and rescue agencies. By the time the hearing adjourned, late afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the polished floor. A reporter thrust a microphone at me. "Ms. Mitchell, do you believe justice will be served?" she asked. I steadied my breath. "Justice," I replied, "means more than assigning blame. It's about learning from our mistakes so that no family endures what we have. If our testimony can save even one life, then speaking today was worth every painful memory." "We all did," I said, glancing at our group. "Now the real work begins, making sure our sky is safer for everyone." The road ahead would be long, filled with policy meetings, technical seminars, and advocacy campaigns. But I was ready, because from the ashes of Flight 92, we would forge a safer tomorrow. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Advocacy office, where I now spent most of my weekdays. Posters of sleek aircraft formations and safety infographics adorned the walls, juxtaposed with framed photographs of survivors. Among them, our own faces from that fateful night. The non-profit, Wings of Resolution, had grown from a seed of necessity into a national organization championing charter flight safety reforms. As its newly appointed Director of Survivor Outreach, I balanced between boardroom policy debates and fieldwork in rural airstrips. This morning, I sat at a glass conference table with aviation attorneys, airline representatives, and NTSB liaisons. At the head of the table stood Elaine Chen, Wings of Resolution's Executive Director, a former FAA inspector whose steely resolve had rallied bipartisan support for our cause. "We have two priorities this quarter," she began. "First, lobbying for mandatory installation of thermal imaging fire detectors in all small charter aircraft. Second, establishing a federal grant program for remote area medevac equipment. The detector mandate will need clear language on sensor calibration intervals and fail-safe redundancy," I said, drawing on the technical specs gleaned from engine failure analyses. "And for the medevac grants, we should partner with local SAR teams to identify priority zones, areas where response times exceed 2 hours. Some small operators can't absorb that without bankrupting their business." After 2 hours of negotiations, we adjourned with a memorandum of understanding to draft proposed legislation. Later that afternoon, I visited Clearwater Airstrip, a dusty runway in rural Wyoming. Marcus and Elijah had arranged a demonstration of a portable medevac kit, foldable stretchers, lightweight oxygen tanks, satellite communicators, and a compact defibrillator. Jason, now an honorary Wings of Resolution volunteer, guided local pilots through scenario drills, while Dr. Lynn oversaw medical simulations. Under the endless blue sky, I watched as community members, hunters, ranchers, even local Boy Scouts took turns practicing a helicopter evacuation procedure. Their faces, intent and earnest, reminded me how far our movement had come since a single charter flight went awry. That evening, back at my loft, I sat at my writing desk, drafting a survivor's guide to post-traumatic growth. Between section headings, embracing loss, relearning bodily trust, finding community, turning pain into purpose, I inserted anecdotes from our group. How Rachel had transformed her grief into a wildlife preservation initiative. How Captain Reynolds had begun mentoring young pilots in emergency procedures. How Jason had taken up painting to express emotions he couldn't articulate in words. As my pen scratched across the page, I acknowledged my own transformation, from flawless event planner to survivor with a prosthetic arm and a mission-driven life. The guide concluded with a chapter I titled, Your New Horizon, urging readers to identify passions they might not have explored before tragedy struck. That night, before sleep claimed me, I dreamt of gliding over the Rockies, prosthetic arm outstretched, sunlight warming the composite shell. Below, tiny aircraft traced white contrails across the cerulean sky, symbols of safer journeys yet to come. The grand ballroom of the Hilton in downtown Denver was a far cry from the charred forest clearing where our lives had been spared. Crystal chandeliers sprinkled prisms of light over white-clothed tables, adorned with centerpieces of white lilies, symbols of rebirth arranged in memory of Flight 912's passengers and crew. Journalists, aviation professionals, survivors and their families gathered for Wings of Resolution's inaugural gala for safety and healing. I stood backstage, adjusting the microphone clip on my blazer, a garment tailored to accommodate my prosthetic arm's socket without drawing undue attention. My heart fluttered, not with fear of speaking, but with a profound gratitude for the journey that led me here. Beside me, Rachel Lynn reviewed her notes for her keynote on wilderness medical response. Captain Reynolds checked the latest amendment drafts on his tablet. Jason fiddled nervously with a boutonniere he intended to pin on his sister, who had flown in to support him this evening. When the master of ceremonies introduced me, I walked onto the stage to applause rippling across the room. I gazed at the crowd. Familiar faces, Marcus, Elijah and other survivors smiling with pride, new supporters nodding in anticipation, and the families of those who hadn't survived, their grief tempered by hope that our advocacy would spare others from similar pain. I began, "Good evening. 4 years ago, I believed I was planning a gala, not realizing fate had plans of its own. That night, Flight 912 exploded, and I woke up in a forest with an arm that was no longer mine. Today, I stand before you with 2 arms, one flesh, one steel, but more importantly, 2 missions, to honor those we lost and to protect those who will fly in the future. I spoke of prosthetics workshops, congressional hearings, and community drills, each milestone a testament to collective will. But resilience, I continued, is not merely surviving. Resilience is transforming trauma into purpose. It is rebuilding our lives piece by piece and then reaching back to lift others. It is allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to grieve, and then to grow stronger, like the forest that bears scars of fire yet thrives anew. Your story inspired me to propose a new inspection protocol at my company," he said. "Thank you." His gratitude warmed me more than the chandeliers ever could. Later, I joined the auction, where a breathtaking aerial photograph of the Rocky Mountains, signed by a survivor pilot, fetched a record bid to fund medevac grants. Laughter and conversation swirled around me like a lively contrail painting the sky. That night, as the last guest departed and the staff reset tables for the following day's conference sessions, I lingered in the empty ballroom. Crystals echoed in the hush like distant echoes of rotor blades. I touched my prosthetic arm's carbon shell, feeling its smooth strength. 4 years ago, I believed my life was predictable until the sky betrayed me. Today, I know that in the vast expanse of possibility, tragedy can be the spark that illuminates a new path. From the ashes of Flight 912, We have built not just safety protocols, but a community fortified by shared purpose. The sun slipped behind the Continental Divide as I stepped into the converted hangar-turned studio, the soft glow of string lights illuminating wall-to-wall displays. Tonight was the opening of Flight and Phoenix, Wings of Resolution's inaugural Survivor Stories exhibition, a multimedia showcase of paintings, sculptures, photographs, and installations created by crash survivors, family members, and advocates. The centerpiece was Jason's immersive installation, a half-buried cockpit frame surrounded by sand and scrub brush with audio recordings of our own heartbeats pulsing through hidden speakers. Visitors donned headphones, placing their hands on the cold steel to feel the rhythms of trauma and triumph beneath their palms. Nearby, Dr. Rachel Lynn's botanical sculptures, delicate arrangements of aspen branches and wildflowers, spoke of regeneration, charred trunks rising from new growth, mirroring our bodies and spirits. Marcus and Elijah contributed a collaborative wood carving, depicting the forest's guardians, bears, eagles, and wolves, traveling alongside a small aircraft, symbolizing our unexpected rescuers. I wandered the space, prosthetic arm catching the lantern light, and paused before my own piece, Skybound, a mixed media canvas. I had painted an upward sweep of cobalt and gold strokes, overlaid with fragments of flight plans and emergency checklists. The wing of the plane, jagged and incomplete, transformed into the silhouette of a phoenix mid-takeoff, its feathers ablaze with determination. A small crowd had gathered. Word had spread that I would speak about the exhibit's mission, to foster empathy, raise funds for our advocacy programs, and offer a creative outlet for survivors wrestling with the aftermath of trauma. I took a deep breath and addressed the guests. Art, I began, is more than decoration. It is a vessel for our most profound experiences. Through these works, we share not just the facts of what happened, but the feelings, fear, loss, hope, rebirth. Each piece here is a bridge between the world of data and the world of the human heart. I explained our Survivor Arts Fund, which provides grants for creative therapy, art supplies, and mentorship with professional artists. Proceeds from the evening's silent auction would launch the fund's first round of scholarships. Throughout the night, I moved between installations, chatting with survivors, describing how creating art had helped them reclaim their narratives. A sculptor's hands trembled as she showed me a miniature fuselage she'd once feared. A photographer wept over a portrait series examining the forest floor where she had lain wounded for hours. Each testimony was a reminder that recovery is as much emotional as it is physical. As the last guest departed, I stood in the center of the hangar, the exhibits bathed in soft moonlight through skylights. The air was still, yet vibrant with the echoes of laughter, conversation, and revelation. My prosthetic arm, once just a mechanical solution, felt like a tool of storytelling, supporting me as I reached for connection. Tomorrow, we would auction off the artwork, launch the Arts Fund, and unveil plans for national traveling exhibits. But tonight, the silence spoke volumes. That our shared wounds had become the very wings that lifted others toward understanding and hope. More than 5 years have passed since that nightmarish flight. Yet every morning when I buckle into my prosthetic liner, I am reminded of how fragile life can be, and how boundless the human spirit when given purpose. Today, I'm boarding a Gulfstream I-4, bound not for a gala or hearing, but for a small airstrip in Nepal, where I will convene the first International Survivors in Flight Mentorship Summit. On this trip, I will meet fellow survivors of aviation incidents from every continent, exchange stories, and launch a global network dedicated to peer support, advocacy, and innovation in post-crash response. The cabin is hushed, except for the soft hum of engines and the muted click of seatbelts. I glance at my reflection in the polished mahogany fold-out table, a woman with streaks of silver in her hair, her posture straight and confident, her left arm an elegant sculpture of carbon fiber and titanium. Next to me sits Dr. Rachel Lynn, her ever-curious eyes poring over notes on search and rescue procedures in high-altitude terrain. Across the aisle, Jason reviews the summit's agenda on his tablet. Keynote addresses, breakout sessions on prosthetic technology, roundtables on regulatory reform, and an evening campfire of stories where we will light real Himalayan yak butter lamps and share narratives of survival under the open sky. As the plane ascends, sunlight splashes through the oval windows, illuminating the dust motes that drift in lazy spirals. I reach across the aisle to touch Dr. Lynn's arm. "Can you believe this is actually happening?" I whisper. She smiles, nodding. From a charred forest in Wyoming to a summit in the roof of the world. It's the trajectory of our resilience. Several survivors await us wrapped in scarves and smiles. A pilot from Indonesia who survived a storm-driven forced landing on a remote island. A flight attendant from Brazil rescued from a riverine crash site. And a mother from Russia whose twin toddlers were among the few survivors of a Siberian nighttime accident. Over the next 2 days, we share our experiences in sessions designed to both honor individual journeys and identify universal needs. In the Prosthetic Exchange Workshop, survivors demonstrate how their customized limbs have evolved. From passive cosmetic covers to advanced myoelectric devices capable of multi-finger articulation and sensory feedback. A Nepalese engineer introduces a solar-powered charging module for prosthetics deployed in off-grid regions. A Kenyan pilot survivor shares how community-built limb adapters allowed her to continue flying Cessna caravans for bush medical services. At each table, laughter mingles with tears as we tackle technical challenges and celebrate triumphs. The room buzzes with languages: Hindi, Portuguese, English, Russian, Bahasa. Yet in every voice resonates the same unspoken chord. I was lost, but now I fly again. By the end of the Prosthetics Day, we co-author a Global Survivors Prosthetic Manifesto, pledging open-source designs, cross-continental training, and micro-grant funding for local production of affordable limb devices. 2. Advocacy without borders. On the summit's second morning, we convene under a canopy of prayer flags near a high-altitude lodge, the chill air carrying distant yak bells. Here at more than 9,000 feet, we draft a universal charter for survivor advocacy. Authored collaboratively, it outlines core principles: mandatory crash site medical caches, standardized black box signal formats, expedited visa processes for international medical evacuations, and global standards for mental health follow-up after aviation trauma. We debate clauses, refine language, and vote unanimously to present the Charter to the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, at the next assembly. As I read the Charter aloud, my prosthetic arm catches a stray sunbeam, gleaming like polished obsidian. I think back to Chapter 7, when I first testified at the NTSB hearing. The thrill then was in making US regulations safer. Now the horizon has expanded decades and thousands of miles, and together we are sowing seeds of policy change that will protect passengers in Nepal, Kazakhstan, Brazil, and beyond. 3. Mentorship circles. Late afternoon, we break into mentorship circles. Each survivor with at least a 5-year recovery milestone is paired with a newer survivor. I find myself seated next to Maya, a young aviation mechanic from the Philippines who lost her lower leg in a runway overrun. Her eyes reflect uncertainty. "How did you find purpose again?" she asks. I share how volunteering for Wings of Resolution, helping write training materials, mentoring other survivors, gave me agency over my narrative. Find what ignites you, I advise. Your wrench in the hangar, your voice in policy, your art in community. Purpose can take many forms. Let your scars guide you to your next chapter. The bond is palpable. A tapestry woven from shared trauma, stitched with hope. We cap the day with a summit flag-raising ceremony at a vantage overlooking the Khumbu Valley. The flag emblazoned with the Wings logo of Wings of Resolution, fluttering against the cerulean sky. 4. A new flight plan. On the return flight, I sit alone, gazing at the Himalayas receding beneath the clouds. My mind races with possibilities: a multinational prosthetics incubator in Nairobi, a global database of emergency kit best practices, a traveling Sky Healers art caravan en route from Kathmandu to Montreal. I open my laptop and draft proposals, interspersing technical schematics with survivor testimonials. When the flight lands back in Denver, dusk has settled over the Rockies. I step onto the tarmac, the cool air a welcome contrast to the crammed cabin. My prosthetic arm flexes unconsciously as I walk toward the terminal. I pause and look up at the star-dotted sky, a vast ocean of possibility. This summit marked a new phase in my journey. Not merely surviving or advocating at home, but catalyzing a global community of survivors whose combined strength can reshape aviation safety, medical response, and the very meaning of recovery. As I collect my suitcase, I murmur to the silent night, we've charted a new flight path, beyond borders, beyond limits. The field, once a routine stop for sightseeing tours, now bore a new meaning. It was the site of Wings of Resolution's first community airshow for survivors, families, and aviation professionals. Today, we would celebrate not only flight, but our collective journey from tragedy to transformation. As I stepped onto the tarmac, my heart swelled at the sight of familiar faces gathered in a semicircle. Captain Reynolds in his pilot's uniform, Jason waving enthusiastically with both arms raised in triumph, Rachel Lynn adjusting her medical kit display table, Marcus and Elijah guiding a group of local Boy Scouts through a makeshift first aid demonstration. All around us, vendor tents bore banners: Sky Healers Art Caravan, Survivor Stories Photo Exhibit, Prosthetics Innovation Zone, and Emergency Kit Workshop. Children darted between stations, clutching miniature airplane models and listening wide-eyed as volunteers shared lessons learned from Flight 92. I made my way to the center and tapped the mic on the podium. A hush fell over the crowd, punctuated only by the distant hum of pre-flight checks. "Welcome," I began, voice steady and warm. 4 years ago, I believed my final boarding call would lead me to a glamorous gala. Instead, it led me into a storm of fire and uncertainty. Today, as I stand among survivors, innovators, families, and friends, I realize that our greatest legacy is not the tragedy we endured, but the community we have built in its aftermath. Each of you, I continued, has played a role in forging a legacy of resilience. The lessons we've learned together about maintenance protocols, emergency preparedness, prosthetics innovation, and global advocacy have rippled far beyond Flight 912's passengers and crew. They have reshaped how small charter operators train, how lawmakers legislate, and how communities respond when disaster strikes. I gestured toward them. Today's air show is not just for entertainment. It is a demonstration of what cooperation can achieve. Precision flight routines by pilots who've undergone our advanced emergency response drills. Search and rescue demonstrations by teams who've partnered through our remote medevac grants. Interactive cockpit exhibits retrofitted with the thermal imaging detectors we've championed, and a flying prosthetics workshop where survivors can learn hands-on how controls interface with muscle signals. Explore the stations. I stepped down and joined Jason at the Campfire of Stories tent, where survivors took turns sharing memories around a circle of benches. The crackling artificial flame cast flickering shadows across faces, some marked by scars, others bright with newfound confidence. A Brazilian flight attendant recounted how her own supports now inspired new cabin safety training, while a Nepalese pilot described building community workshops for low-income amputees to fabricate custom arm adapters. Their voices wove together into a tapestry of hope, each thread a testament to human ingenuity. Nearby, Dr. Lynn and Marcus were demonstrating field-expedient tourniquet techniques to scouts, emphasizing the importance of local knowledge and simple tools. I watched as a young girl practiced the rap, her determined expression mirroring the resolve I'd felt when I first gripped a broken branch to craft a makeshift litter. Later, I moved to the Sky Healers Art Pavilion, where dozens of paintings and sculptures donated by survivors and professional artists were displayed. A guardian wolf carved from reclaimed metal by Marcus caught my eye. It stood poised beside a model cockpit illuminated by soft LED lights, symbolizing our evolution from fragility to strength. I gently ran my prosthetic hand over its smooth surface, marveling at how reclaimed debris could be transformed into art that healed both creator and viewer. As the sun dipped toward the mountains, the event drew to a close with a mass flyby. 12 aircraft trailing colored smoke in red, white, and blue, the colors of the sky we share and the flag we serve. I watched them carve arcs across the sky, each contrail a wing upon which our stories soared. That evening, as volunteers packed up tents and the last guests departed, I stood alone on the runway, breath visible in the cooling air. I unclipped my prosthetic arm, setting it beside me on the warm concrete. It hummed faintly, a reminder of the technology that had become part of my body and my identity. I knelt and touched the smooth carbon fiber shell, as if honoring a companion who had carried me through darkness. I looked up at the vast expanse above, stars just beginning to emerge, and whispered a vow to continue this work until every corner of the globe knew that tragedy need not define a life, and that every survivor, empowered with knowledge, community, and purpose, can turn their ashes into wings. In the soft hush of Timber Ridge Field, I felt the unity of past and future, pain and purpose, loss and legacy. From the first flicker of hope in a charred forest to this glowing moment of homecoming, our journey was complete, and yet infinitely onward.